this is going to be harder than any of us thought. So, we'll take a moment, gather our composure, and then we'll move forward, if that's good. Ed Neal has been a part of our lives, and this whole building vibrates right now and weeps just a little bit because this is the place he enjoyed being. So, as you sit there, sit up straight, don't get his pew, and make sure that you pay attention, because all of that is very important to Ed as you've entered this place. I told his family that the Psalm 19 talks about the heavens declaring the glory of God and the earth showing forth his handiwork. In so many ways, where you sit shows forth the handiwork of Ed Neal, and before you is that which declares his glory in a lot of ways, because this was the glory of his life, his family. And all of you who have been friends to him have been a part of that important connection that meant so much to Ed. He was about relationships, and he absolutely loved having relationships with each of you. So may you feel the blessing that you have brought the best gift of all you've taken time to be a part of today. And as you embrace this family, you're doing the one thing Ed can't do today, and you're doing it on his behalf and on behalf of and through the power of the Holy Spirit. You are comforting this family. May God give you the feeling of grace and peace and blessing because of the gift you bring to this moment. Thank you. Psalm 84 says, "How I love your temple, Lord Almighty. How I want to be there. I love to be in the Lord's temple. With all my whole being I sing for joy to the living God. Even the sparrows have built a nest, and the swallows have their home. They keep their young near the altars. Lord Almighty, my King and my God. How happy are those who live in your temple, always singing praise to you, Lord Almighty. How happy are those who trust in you." And Psalm 24. "The earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all who live in it, for he founded it on the seas, established it on the waters. Who may ascend to the mountain of the Lord? Who may stand in this holy place? The one who has clean hands, a pure heart, and doesn't trust in an idol or swear by a false god." My friend Ed Neal had a seamless view of life. From his remarkable perspective, he could take everything from art to architecture to construction to history to the heritage of a family to the future prospects and put them together and draw the most beautiful concept of what could be. And it was seamless. He could take something old and something new, a person who was blood family and a person who was a friend, an old friend from years ago and a new friend that he made, and seamlessly put it together as a part of his heart. Like the passage said, "I was glad when they said unto me, 'Let us go into the house of the Lord.'" Truly, that's the way Ed Neal felt. This was priority. Not just from being from the old school of being one who always was to be in church on Sunday. He was always glad to be in the house of the Lord, and it was important to him. The psalmist also wrote that the world belonged to him as his handiwork, and those seeking to occupy it, to stand before the Lord, had to meet some qualifications. They should have clean hands, a pure heart, not trust in an idol or swear by a false god. This was a man of integrity. This is a man who lived and believed and experienced and enjoyed the life that God gave to him. In other words, he's a person who is sincere and righteous and committed to the Lord. And in short, we remember a good man this day. And Ed would expect us to, and he would truly appreciate it. The music you hear is what he chose. When Mary Ann died, his beloved wife of 61 years, when they asked him, I think Margaret asked him, said, "What would you like played at Mama's funeral?" And so he told her the songs. And she said, "Daddy, that's what you want for your funeral." He said, "Yeah." Said, "This way I get to hear it, and we'll just have one run through right now for what's going to happen later on." He felt like it was a pretty good rehearsal to have. You can hear him say that, can't you? So the music you hear today is something that was important to his ears. Having Kathy sing was something that he wrote to her 20 years ago in a letter that she has kept safely for all these years to be able to share today. So we enter now into the spirit of Ed's life in this service. Jack Jenkins is one who has been touched by Ed's life, mentored in many ways, and also has been a special part of it. And Jack's going to come and share with us.
Woo. Well, this is, I'm not nearly qualified to stand up here to talk about Ed, or nearly qualified to stand in this room. This is a fancy church, and Ed was a fancy man, and he loved this place. He loved these windows. He loved these fixtures. He loved everything about it. He did the beautiful addition. He loved the fountain, which one of the workers referred to it when he asked them what they thought when they got it working. He said, "Well, Mr. Neal, that's a real po-down you got going on over there." Ed loved a real po-down. He loved fancy things, and he adored them. Ed took me under his wing as a young architectural student and worked me in his office and taught me so much about life. He taught me how to draw. He taught me how to treat people. He taught me when Ed would go on a job site, Ed was old school, and he was like the Pope when he was running something. And when he walked on the site, he spoke to the workers. He told them they were doing a good job. He befriended them, and they loved him. Even when they were doing it wrong and he criticized them, they still loved him. Ed was a great man. When I started working for him, we were working one day, and I'm Jack Pease Jenkins, and he had a lot of stuff on the wall in his office, and he had a picture of the Pease home, which was down here on Broadway. And he took it off the wall, and he said, "You should have this. You're a Pease. This belongs to you more than it does to me." And that picture, it always touched me, and it still hangs in my office right next to me. Always makes me think of Ed. Ed did the government center, which has been quite a controversial fact in recent years. And I think it's a real testament to Ed that it would probably be really too expensive to tear down, and it will always stand in his honor. Whether you love it or hate it, it can be seen from anywhere around, and Ed would really enjoy that. There are so many funny Ed stories, and I swear I'm not going to tell them all, but one of the funniest ones that, Ed was fancy, and Ed had a love for Victorian furniture, which is a good thing because there are not a lot of people who have a love for Victorian furniture. And Ed had a beautiful apartment up there in Spring Harbor, and he called Warner one morning, and this is one of the funniest, and he said, "Warner, where am I? And whose stuff is this? Where am I?" And Warner goes, "Dad, that's your apartment, and that's all your stuff." And Ed goes, "Well, that explains why it's so nice." One of my favorite things through the years, we always kept in touch, and in later years, we did a lot of traveling around with a group of men that Jack Collins is the only other one still alive, Jack and I, so you probably don't want to get in our group. It might not fare well for you. And Ed would always fuss at Jack and say, "I need to pay for some gas," and Jack would say, "Everybody over 90 in the car doesn't have to pay." So Ed wouldn't pay. One of my favorite things he said was when he saw something really bad, or he thought it was really bad, he would look at the building and he'd say, "Well, a thing of beauty is a joy forever." He was funny. He could say anything to anybody and get away with it. we had some great trips with that group, and it was a real honor to know him. We went to the Swan House, where he proceeded to tell the very fancy docent he had known the people who built the Swan House, and he ended up turning the whole tour around so that Ed could tell them what really happened. Then one year we went to Milledgeville, to the original governor's mansion in Milledgeville, which is a beautiful building, incredibly well done. And we went over all 3 floors of the thing, and Ed and Jack Collins would walk in the room. You know, Ed couldn't see that well in theory in later years, but for a man who couldn't see well, he had a very sharp eye. And he would walk into a room and they would completely annihilate a pair of drapes that the finest restoration people in the country had put together. Or he'd criticize a chair, he'd go, "This thing is not only inappropriate, it is not fine at all." So on that tour, we took so much time that we didn't make it to the 3rd floor, and the docent shut us down. They were going to make us leave. And Ed looked at the little girl and he says, "You know, I'm 90, and I'm probably not coming back to see the 3rd floor." So she went and got approval, and we proceeded on to see the rest of the building. So he could get away with an awful lot, and we sure loved him, and he just meant a lot to us. Ed took me under his wing, and he taught me a lot about life. His example as a father, his example as an architect. Ed took, all you know this, but when all other families were at the beach enjoying their vacation, Ed insisted on dragging all his children and his whole family around Europe to see all the old things that he loved. And y'all will cherish that forever. He was a dear man, and I love him, and I'll miss him. And I know he's having a great time in heaven, and I know Marianne is fussing at him about something. Thank you all for letting me have this opportunity to speak. I loved him, and he made a huge difference in my life, and it makes me think, am I making a difference like that to anybody right now? And I think that's the thing about Ed. He cared. Love y'all.
This is my song.
Will you pray with me? Spirit of our living God, giver of good relationships, good examples, creative people, individuals who touch and absolutely shape our lives and even our world. We thank you for Ed Neal. And I pray that as he is in heaven now, that you will allow him to be a part of what we are doing here. In our feeble remembrances, there is so much heart behind it in every one of our lives. Sometimes through a veil of tears, sometimes through laughter, but always in a spirit of truth and of admiration and of love. We love this family too, and we pray that your Holy Spirit may use the memories and everything said and done to bless and comfort and offer peace. Thank you for loving us so much that you allow us the privilege of having people like Ed Neal in our lives. Bless his memory, and may it live in this world forever, even as he lives with you forever. In the name of Jesus Christ, our Savior. Amen. It's not like Ed didn't warn you that this was going to happen, for sure. Jack, that was beautiful. He loved you and appreciated you, and you're part of his legacy. But you're absolutely right. He did warn us ahead of time that one day he wasn't going to be here. And I know we had conversations with the family, and in the conversations we kept saying, we figured he'd be here at least 100 years, if not more. That was part of what we felt. Because there's some people that really God ought to just leave here all the time. There's some people that we just never are going to be ready to give up. No matter the age, no matter what happens, we just figure we really need them here. And Ed Neal is one of those people. And so what God will do is convert that into memories and grace and love in our hearts and allow us to continue to live in that relationship. It will be a little bit different, but heaven knows what we're going to get to do when we see him again in heaven and what things we're going to get to talk to him about, or at least listen to him about in some way or another. He kept saying, though, that one day would come when he wouldn't be here. He'd said that for years. The grandchildren, especially Neil here, remembers that he was given to saying that he wasn't going to be much longer in this world. In fact, what he shared was this. Papa has always been a planner and a bit of a worrier. From as early as I can remember, Papa would tell me, one of these days I'm not going to be here anymore and you're going to have to take care of this place, referring to the country place and referring to the Victorian furniture and the other things there. And Neil said, and that's a lot for a 4-year-old boy to take in. He continued, some nights I could not sleep thinking about how he wasn't going to be here anymore. But as I grew older, my worry wasn't so much that as it was that it was not so much everything I was going to have to take care of, but that he was going to outlive me. Over the weekend, through the stories and jokes, our family all thought the same thing. I guess we're finally going to get to see the funeral Papa has been planning for the past 30 years. And yes, you're a part of it today. Troy Amos, the third, my buddy, called me one day, called me this week, and he said, Dr. Jimmy, he said, do you have an hour tomorrow? That was yesterday. He said, I want us to do something we've been talking about for a long time. Well, I knew what he was talking about, but I let him tell me because I wanted to hear it from him. He said, let's go to the country. And I said, of course. I said, can we do it early? He said, perfect. And so at 7:30 yesterday, he dropped by the church and picked me up, and we got in the truck together, and we rode out to the country. The country. we've heard from Ed all of these years. Ed and I had talked about it, tried to find time to go ourselves, even as Troy and I had, but had never been able to get it all worked out. Ed had a busy social life, you know, and then I had the preacher's life, so it never kind of came around that way. But this time we got it worked out. So I went to that beautiful country place where Ed and Mary Ann and the whole family had made so many memories together. And when you drive up, you can just feel the love and the grace and experience the memories just by breathing the air and seeing what's there. Troy got out of the truck and he walked straight to a bench up under a tree, an oak tree from Natchez, Mississippi. I bought the story. I've got it. That's fine. Ed always said it was from Natchez, Mississippi, and no one ever checked it out. But the spot overlooks, that bench overlooks the bucolic setting that contains a lake, the woods, the flagpole, and everything else that Ed saw as beautiful about this beloved sanctuary that was so precious to him. We sat there, and I'll be honest, I was on the verge of tears through the whole time, both from the beauty and from the meaning of the place. And I was seeing things from Ed Neal's perspective as I sat there. I looked at that lake through his eyes, and I remembered all the things he had said. All of a sudden, on the bench, everything began to make sense. Now, trust me on this. It really did. It began to make sense to me. Ed died suddenly, unexpectedly, and remarkably peacefully. Death came as an interruption instead of an event. And as I sat on the bench with Troy, one name came to mind: Enoch. Yep, the Old Testament character Enoch, the man who was filled with goodness and family. Methuselah was his son. And as I thought about it, I thought about that one pregnant passage in Genesis 5:24 about this man who lived reportedly 365 years. And then it said this: Enoch walked faithfully with God, then he was no more, because God took him away. I absolutely love that image. Enoch was one of those people whom God walked with and treasured a relationship with, and he treasured the relationship with God. And in the very beginning, you remember when God created Eden, he'd go down and walk with Adam and Eve in the cool of the day. And they saw all the beautiful things until Adam and Eve messed it up. But Enoch didn't mess it up. Enoch walked with him every day, and one day Enoch just didn't come home. Not here. God took him home there. And that is exactly what happened to Ed Neal. You think about it. He was one of those people who knew how to put things together. He knew how to keep life in balance. And there are many times we're intrigued by the fact that Enoch didn't die, but just went home. And I'm intrigued by the seamless way that Ed lived and just went to heaven. That intrigues me. And it's going to bring you comfort. You may not feel it right now, but it's going to bring you enormous comfort in the days ahead. Because you're going to picture not some tragic moment, not some hospital experience. You're going to picture him getting up, going to the bistro, calling Juana on the phone that morning to sing happy birthday to him. It was Juana's birthday. Juana, am I saying it right? And after he did that, going back to his room, sitting down in his chair and stopping breathing. It was as seamless as it could be. He never stopped living in this world. And he started living in that world right away. And that's the way he lived his life. He was a good man. He lived a seamless life. He got his education, began his work, started his own firm, continued relationships with longtime friends, loved to see how history met the present, and sought to preserve it to the best of his ability. When he designed, he tried to put things in context, seamlessly writing his work into the design and into the history of our community. And we'll benefit from that for a long, long time. We do here at the church. He knew what fit, be it furniture, art, architecture, restoration, whatever it was. He knew what fit. And he could go in and not interrupt it, just seam it on in to where it needed to be. And the thing he never liked was just taking it away and starting over. He liked to take it and see what he could do with it and preserve and remember and keep the history alive. He saw how God created this world, and he believed and he taught this truth. He taught in the middle school department at the church for 20 years, taking the story of God's goodness and grace that he believed in his heart and passing it along to another generation of individuals, just like he did his architectural gifts and his views, and seamlessly putting it in. He did not want this to be a time of interruption. He worked as a deacon at this church. For 20 years, he taught that Sunday school class. He was a deacon for many years. He was on numerous committees. He showed that seamless connection to the church by producing his cradle roll certificate. And he said, I was actually a member of this church before I was ever born, because his mother was carrying him when she was a member here, and he was born into this church, and for 93 plus years he has been a part of this church family. That he was proud of. He is the longest the longest member of this church in the history of this church, which is only 9 years shy of 200 years. And he boasted that in a meeting at the church several years back. But he wasn't siloed in his living. He wove together church friends, lifelong schoolmates, new acquaintances, clients, people from all walks of life into a seamless tapestry of relationships where everyone felt like they belonged. Yes, some of his friends were Methodists and Presbyterians and an Episcopalian or two, but he always was going to be at the Baptist church, and that was a good thing. And he wove all of those relationships together, and it was beautiful. He was a man in full, and he lived his life to the full. When Ed moved to Spring Harbor, often referred to him as Pearl Harbor, it was an arduous task. First, he didn't want to move there. It was hard enough to get him to move from the country to the townhouse here. And so they finally got that worked out because Mary Ann had to go and have special care at Spring Harbor. And so they said, we don't want to lose both of you, so you come and live in town so you can get in and out easier. And it also gave him the freedom to walk to Chillicothe and to the Rotary Club on a regular basis. He also was difficult to get to move from the townhouse to Spring Harbor. I asked Margaret one day at church, I said, well, how's the move going? And she said, we're moving. And I said, what did you get done this week? She said, we moved a chair. It took months. And I said, well, that sounds like progress. She said, well, we actually brought 2 back when we carried that one there. He had 162 chairs by actual count. He loved chairs. But once he moved in, I asked how it was going. And he said, well, this place isn't as I expected it would be. And it was around Christmas when we had that conversation. And I asked what the problem was. And he said that Florence had sent him a mistletoe ball. What was it, Florence? It's kind of a fabric of some sort. It was kind of an artificial mistletoe ball, so it would last for a long time. And he had gone, pulled a chair out, and hung it over the door at his apartment in Spring Harbor. And I said, well, that's nice. He said, but I'm really disappointed. He said, I expected a whole line of women down the hall waiting for a kiss. So Spring Harbor did not rise to his expectations by any means at that point. He did delight with his lunch and dinner companions at Spring Harbor, and he loved to socialize And he loved to talk. And he loved to keep up with who was asking him to sit with them that evening. I just can't sit with all of them all the time. Some of them have to just wait a bit. Everyone wanted his company. I told him he was like Benjamin Franklin in Paris, where he was popular and everybody wanted to be around him. He'd always grin when I told him that. He was blessed to have Stephanie as a caregiver for him. She was wonderful to him. And he'd often say that if he turned up dead, know that Stephanie had killed him. By the way, he always called her Jennifer. Nobody knows why, but he just called her Jennifer the whole time. But you've been wonderful to him, and you've given him the grace and the independence that he's needed. The seamless nature of his life carried through the decline and loss of Mary Ann, the death of Mildred, the loss of many of his friends, the failure of his eyesight, the lifestyle changes that he had to make, and amazingly, he was resilient. He would always come back from whatever it was. He had a way of coming back. And that was part of the stamina of his life. And he'd walk from one moment to the next, one life experience to the next, one challenge or blessing to the next, with a steadiness and grace that was remarkable. And on that day he died, it was a seamless day for him. I thought it was beautiful. And I think it speaks to how much he loved not just Juana, but how he loved every one of you. If he had been able to pick what to do in the last moments, the last breaths of his life, he would have spoken to each one of you in a personal way. That's the gift that's there. And God granted him that in part. Well, the seamlessness of his life is easily heard in the memories of other family members. Neil also shared that Papa always had a project or somebody else's house he was working on. Said in 2010, he had eye surgery, leaving him without the ability to drive. He said, I was home for the summer training for college baseball when my mom suggested I could be his caretaker and earn a little money driving Papa around every day so that he could run errands and accomplish any projects that he had on his mind. That was money well spent, wasn't it, Margaret? But instead of calling it driving Miss Daisy, Neil always called it driving Mr. Crazy. And Ed loved that. And he would tell me at the front door, I'd say, well, which boy is driving you around now? And he'd say, you mean driving Mr. Crazy? And I'd say, yeah, that. And Neil talks about the places they went and his going to Rose Hill with Hooper Turner and Bill Turner and John Connett and Vince and all the others who have been a part of his life. And that's just a snapshot of the things that he enjoyed doing. And you guys helped give him the freedom to be able to do that. You gave him that ability and the fun that went along with it too. And probably kept him on this earth a little longer when you drove for him, since he was blind. He said, Papa taught us all the importance of taking care of the things you have in life. Always leave the place better than you found it. If there's anything we can say without a doubt, it's that he left this world a better place than he found it, and he'll be dearly missed. I can't wait to see him again one day, Neil said. Daniel told me that what he said was, Troy, Papa, and I went to the farm to eat and spend the night. We cooked steaks on the grill, and afterwards, Troy disappeared into the woods. I fell asleep on the couch, and when I woke up, Papa was sitting in front of the fire with boxes of papers next to him. He said, I didn't say anything. I just watched as he burned every document in those boxes. It looked like important paperwork that had been filed away for years, and he was just getting rid of it. And then finally, he pulled out a paper that said something like Best Grandparent Award. It was from the kids when Grandparents' Day, when Neil had given it to him when he was a kid. He said Papa admired the award for minutes before sitting it on the side, and he went back to burning everything else. That was the only remains from his activity. And he said, my mom found it this past weekend looking through some old stuff which sparked this memory. It reiterates what I'm sure everybody else has already said, Daniel said. But Papa was a man who lived a full and successful life with all the relationships he built and possessions and accolades he attained. Nothing was more important to him than his family. And more specifically, his 5 grandsons and 2 granddaughters. He loved us unconditionally and never missed a moment to let us know how important we are to him. I'm blessed to have loved and learned from him. The lessons he taught me shape who I am today. Now listen, this is the testimony of the grandchildren to this man. And every one of you have said the same kinds of things. It's beautiful. It's meaningful. And of all the things he has, that's the gift that you give him today. William tells of a time when he was with Papa and asked him about the andirons in the fireplace. Well, Ed really didn't see William as one who'd be so interested in such things, and he couldn't see everybody that was there. So Edward, his brother, is one of the sort of the historian of the family in a way, and is interested in that kind of stuff. So Ed launched into telling about the andirons, and then he said, "Wait a minute, is Edward here?" And William said, "No, he's not here." He said, "Well, then I'm not going to go on with this. You're not interested in it at all." He wasn't going to waste it at that particular point. But William is named William Stinson Neal. And when they told, and it's because there's a painting and there's some family out there that had Stinson in it or whatever, but when they told Ed that he was William Stinson Neal, Ed started crying. And he said, "That was my grandfather's brother," I think it was, my grandfather's brother's name. He was so overwhelmed by the fact that the legacy was going on and the actual name was going to be there. Look at the obit, how many thirds are in this family and how many people carry names forward. It's because he loved you, he gave you names, he wanted you to carry those names on. And as you do, you carry them on as a part of the legacy. You carry them proudly. He was blessed when Edward spent time in Paris and told his stories of being there, and he began to relive those things. Margaret told of taking her dad to the Decorator's Show House in Roswell, and Jack, that's where they went to the Decorator's Show House, and Ed didn't think they measured up, but he wanted to go see the Swan House, and that's when they ended up in the Swan House and turned the whole Swan House process on its ear. Somehow or another, Troy, when he was 16, ended up with the task of accompanying Ed to Washington, D.C., and Warner and Edward ended up along too. And when they got to the airport, Warner knew enough about the airport to get them on through, and Ed looked over at Troy and said, we'd still be out on the curb if they hadn't come up here. At least they know what they're doing. Then they went to Ford's Theater, and they finagled a way that Ed was put ahead of the line and taken right on in. They went to the Washington Monument. They finagled a way that he was put ahead of the line. And then they went to their favorite Italian restaurant. And they were sitting there, and Ed looked over to Warner and he said, "Look at the other table. Burl Ives is sitting over there." And Warner said, "That's not Burl Ives." And he said, "I know Burl Ives when I see him." And Warner said, "Burl Ives is dead." And Ed said, "I know that's Burl Ives." And finally the man looked over and said, "Sir, I'm not Burl Ives." And Ed was never daunted. He looked back at him and said, "Has anybody ever told you you look just like Burl Ives?" Well, while that was going on, Troy and Edward ate Big Ed's dessert. And that didn't go over real well. Ed felt that every meal should be properly served and finished with a dessert. And no matter how stuffed he was, he'd always say, "I think I'd like a piece of pie." So for the boys to have eaten the dessert was a really big deal. As I mentioned, the grandchildren took their turns as drivers for Ed. And while with driving came other chores like cutting the grass. Troy even had to cut it in the rain. And Ed had placed his mark on every family member's home. He would go in and put things and say, we need to have this here. And he'd bring in a table or he'd bring in a lamp or something that way. And one time, I forget which sibling was at which house, and as they walked in and said, I've got a lamp just like that. And they said, no, said, Dad brought it over this afternoon. He said it was at your house and it really looked better over here than over there. And so said, you never knew when you walked in. Said, one time a table was moved from one house to another. Walked in, where's the dining room table? Well, Daddy thought it would look better at so-and-so's house. Well, that's kind of the way it was. He would not leave things in their place, whether it were chairs or lamps or pictures, a Winston Churchill clock, and even a dining room table. You never knew where they might be taken next. He had an eye for style and the correctness, and he could tell if something was off by a fraction of an inch. Warner went out to the house when they were building it at the farm and was going to put speakers in. And while he was doing it, one of the workmen out there came up and said, what are you doing? He said, I'm putting in a speaker system. And the workman said, well, look, you had better do it exactly right. This man is the toughest guy you've ever worked with, and you can't be off a fraction. Said, I put a bathtub in, it was 1/8 of an inch off, and he made me pull the whole thing out and redo it. And Warner said, well, I've been dealing with that for about 18 years in my own life working for him. Well, I was on the local library board when we were honored to have a splendid gift of art from an acclaimed artist, Florence Arthur Neal. And when Florence's art was given to the library, I remember how excited everybody was about it, but I never put the link together, Florence and Ed, until I came to church. And on that Sunday, Ed came up and said, Jimmy, have you seen Florence's art? And I said, I don't think so. And he said, at the library. And I said, that Florence? He was so proud of you. He was so proud of what you've done and who you've become. It's interesting. If you look at every one of these children and you think about Ed and his ability to understand art and business, history, relationships, all of these different things, an entrepreneurial spirit. It's like all of you were a bag of marbles and we dropped them and every one of you went off in a direction and did part of what he did. It takes all of you to be put together to make one Ed. And it takes all of you to fulfill the dreams that he had in his life. I watched Margaret put her business together and how proud he was. I watched Warner as he started his business. I know how proud he was of Mildred, and I walked with him and saw him through the grief there. These kids were who made his life complete. Each of you and your children have blessed Ed, and you've brought him joy, and he's never been shy about singing your praises. And when you wake up in the middle of the night and you think about it, I want you to remember you've done everything you could for him in that seamless life, going step by step. You have been a part of that journey. He loved this church, every element of it. The very buildings stand as an example of his personal investment in art and understanding and design. We sang for the 175th anniversary of the church. It was a grand day. I hadn't been here very long, and we were in this sanctuary. Ed was so excited about it. And he told me, he said, my whole family's going to be with me. And he had gathered everybody up. I think it was a command performance, wasn't it? For y'all, most of y'all were able to be here. And so they were all lined up on the pew out here. And at the very end of the service, it had been beautiful. We'd sung old hymns. We had done all of these different things. And at the end of the service, as we sang the last song, the benediction song that we had the whole congregation share in, the family all started holding hands. Beautiful, sentimental moment. Well, as it turns out, Ed had leaned over to Neal and whispered in his ear what he wanted to do. And Neal heard, let's hold hands. And so Neal passed it down the line, and everybody said, you mean, boy, he's really getting into this if he wants us all to stand here. That wasn't Ed, to stand and hold hands and sway during the last song. And they said, that's what Daddy wants to do. That's what Papa wants to do. So they did. Everybody grabbed hands, and they were there together. And at the end of the service, Ed went up and said, that was nice, but what were y'all doing? And he said, well, you wanted to hold hands. He said, no, I asked Neil if he wanted to go to hula hands after it was over. One of my favorite ones, though, was Daniel told me, he said, Papa spoke highly of me. I love that man because he spoke highly of me. We were close friends. But he says, I'm embarrassed to tell you, but one Sunday when you were out of town, we were sitting on the pew right before church was to begin. He looked over and stated, Jimmy isn't here today. I don't care for this message. It's time to go. And they got up and left before the service started. Now that's a man after my own heart. When I paid him a compliment, he would always say to me, well, flattery will get you everywhere. But there was a lot to compliment him for, and you see it all around us here. You enjoyed being together, living together, celebrating together, eating together, playing together as a family. And he never wanted to miss a minute of that. At Mary Ann's funeral, I waited until this moment to mention that she was the love of his life and he of hers for 61 years. And I'll never forget how he cared for her and how interested he was. When he'd bring her to church, even when she was failing so much, he was in enough denial and all that he was going to make sure she was able to do. It was a difficult time, but seamlessly that love found how to care for her and love her no matter what her condition was. That seamless love never missed a beat. I watched Ed as he loved and cared, and as you, each of you, supported him in that. You and your family have done so much. Florence, Margaret, Warner, Mildred, Mary Ann, Emma, Neil, Troy, Daniel, Edward, William. You are his legacy. You are his legacy. Don't ever forget that. And don't ever let that fade one bit. Retell the stories. Recount the memories. Laugh together and, cry together. You've earned those memories through the love you've shown him and that he's shown you. His life teaches the power of a life's journey in a seamless way, through good and through challenges. The psalmist could have just as well been sitting on the bench with us, Troy, when he wrote, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. It was gorgeous. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I'm not going to be here forever. I'll fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, and my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I'll dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Goodness and mercy. Mercy can be translated love. Think about it. That bucolic setting, sitting on the bench, still waters, green lawn, and seamlessly walking from that kind of setting onto the golden streets, the pearly gates, the beautiful world of heaven. Jesus said, let not your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go and prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I'll come again. I'll receive you into myself, that where I am, there you may be also. So I paraphrase the passage I used at the beginning. Not Enoch, but Edward Neal walked faithfully with God. Then he was no more, because God took him home. I only hope the pearly gates are hung straight, not an eighth of an inch off. or St. Peter's going to be busy fixing those things. I'm going to miss him. I know you are. But thank God he never suffered, and his last thoughts were loving y'all. Pray with me. Dear Jesus, you are so good to us in so many ways, and you reach through the lives of people who change ours. Bless this world and keep alive the spirit of a man like Ed Neal. Keep it alive in these whom he loved, and in the hopes and dreams and the understanding of how seamlessly to just stitch things together, not allowing things to be interrupted, but allowing things to progress. Be with this community that he loved, but more than that, this family. We look to you for comfort and strength, and we'll be as faithful as we possibly can be. In your holy name and by the power of your Spirit. Amen.